Smokey Robinson, the extraordinary soulful singer, has now lived 8 decades of life and has seen it all. From the sheer height of musical success to a marriage shrouded in the cloak of sadness and heartbreak, the singer knows a thing or two about heart-wrenching experiences.
I wasn't paying attention, but I don't remember anyone.
It turns out his career wasn't just about writing hit singles. Join us as we delve into the sad life of the iconic Smokey Robinson. Smokey Robinson's early life. Smokey Robinson's soulful voice and impactful lyricism changed the genre of R&B forever. His career spans most of his 8 decades of life, from starting his career at a very young age to supporting the musical journeys of the biggest names in the industry. Smokey knows a thing or two about success. He has spent almost 6 years making, writing, and producing music. The band that he would form in 1955 would give Motown Records the force that was much needed for African-American artists. So, Smokey's contributions weren't just monumental for himself. He was also able to create an avenue for other members of his community. As a young, struggling artist from Detroit, he knew the hardships that came with being a person of color in Detroit. He also had a firm belief that music has the power to transform lives. So he ended up doing that for himself and other names in the industry. However, the most proactive years of his life are pretty much over. Smokey Robinson is now over 80. How he lives is sad, and somehow this is a full circle moment for the soulful singer. As a young boy, Smokey had no idea that he would make a name for himself in the industry. After all, he wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. On 19th February 1940, he was born as William Robinson Jr. in the North End area of Detroit, Michigan. His father was an African American, and his mother was of African American and French descent. William Robinson was born during the times when racism in the United States of America was rampant, and artistic opportunities for the African American community were extremely limited. There's not much known about Smokey's early life, but we know for sure that his life was profoundly hard from a very young age. He was only 3 years old when his parents decided to get separated. So, at a very impressionable age, William Robinson Jr. was torn between living with one parent and then the other. He himself admitted that his early years were spent in a lot of pain. The heartache was too much for a child to handle, but the worst was yet to come. At the age of 10, Smokey lost his mother, whom he dearly loved and adored. Talking about this heart-wrenching experience, the singer remarked that when he heard about his mother's passing, his world stopped. He felt frightened, hopeless, and alone. The star of his world was gone. While talking to Mojo about losing his mother, William Robinson Jr. said, "Even though I had a lot of people around me, my mother was what I call a profound speaker. She always spoke to me in proverbs and things like that, and tried to give me wisdom through conversational nuggets." After his mother's passing, Smokey was left to fend with his dad, who, for the most part, was a good man. But the singer didn't believe that he had a profound connection with his father. He has often cited him as a mild-mannered man, but whenever he would have a drink, things would change slightly. Smokey doesn't speak very fondly about his father, but appreciates his support during his early years as a young musician trying to make it big. His dad lived up to the age of 89, and for that long companionship, Smokey felt grateful. Another important presence in Smokey's life was that of his uncle and godfather, who also gave him the iconic moniker as we know it today. In the singer's own words, "My Uncle Claude was my favorite uncle. He was also my godfather. He and I were really, really close. He used to take me to see cowboy movies all the time when I was a little boy because I loved cowboy movies. He got a cowboy name for me, which was Smokey Joe. So from the time I was 3 years old, if people asked me what my name was, I didn't tell them my name was William. I told them my name was Smokey Joe." By the age of 12, he had dropped the Joe part of the name. The rumors about him changing his name to Robinson from Joe are very speculative. Many people believe that the change in name was credited to his being a light-skinned African American. Yet Smokey has denied these rumors multiple times. At the end of the day, Smokey had the joyful company of his dad and uncle, and at the same time, the singer's painful experiences with his parents and tragic loss encouraged him to express his feelings through poetry and songs. He was very young when he picked up a pen and his diary to express his profound emotions and feelings. However, contrary to popular perception, he wasn't much of a shut-yourself-in-a-room-and-let-the-words-flow person. He has remarked that he would write whenever anything inspiring would hit him. In fact, during his writing process, he never felt the need to isolate himself from the world. His writing process was always about openness and honesty. Perhaps that's why his lyricism would go on to become the heart and the soul of millions. But maybe this was a gimmick of luck. You'd be surprised to know that Smokey's first passion wasn't poetry or songwriting. He believed himself to be an athlete in the making. Since he was pretty average in academics while attending Northern High School, he put a lot of focus on building his athletic credibility. However, that ambition was short-lived. Later on, his interest became fixated on music, and his early influences have a lot to do with that. Smokey's musical influences and emerging career. If there's anything important about the historicity of the city of Detroit, it is the fact that it was brimming with musical talent. In fact, two very iconic names from that era were Smokey's neighbors. The singer was only 10 years old when he met Ronnie White. At the age of 13, he befriended Pete Moore, and the very next year, he was hanging out with Bobby and Claudette Rogers. But nothing would come closer to his friendship with two of the biggest names in the curation of music in the United States of America, Diana Ross and Aretha Franklin. Smokey Robinson basically grew up with the duo. Diana used to live 4 doors down the street from the soulful singer, and they were introduced when Ross was 8 years old. However, it is Smokey and Aretha who go way back. Since Aretha lived right around the corner from Robinson, it allowed the duo to make their friendship and musical connection flourish. Both of them became friends when Franklin was just 5 years old. It was actually Aretha's prowess at the piano that left Smokey in awe of her talent. But at the same time, he channeled inspiration and motivation to pursue a career in music, considering Aretha's commitment to playing the piano. Despite living in a small neighborhood, Smokey was lucky to interact with like-minded people whose careers would only end up rivaling his very own. It is perhaps very surprising that with such varied musical friends, Smokey didn't end up singing in the church. In fact, his presence there was very seldom. He was best friends with Vaughn, Aretha's brother. And while he would accompany Vaughn to the church, he never considered singing in the choir like many other young artists of his time. Robinson's other musical inspiration came from the groups that he thoroughly enjoyed listening to as a kid. Bands like Nolan Strong and the Diablos and Billy Ward and his Dominoes were strong musical influences. But the inspiration behind his vocals come from Barrett Strong, another Detroit singer who would go on to give the iconic Motown records their first hit single with Money. Listening to these strong musical icons inspired Smokey to start a band of his own age at the age of 15 in the year 1955. The band would be initially called The Five Chimes, and its first ever lineup included Smokey himself, his childhood friend Ronald White, as well as his classmate Pete Moore. 2 years later, the group would rebrand to call themselves the Matadors. This is when Bobby Rogers would join the lineup and would stay with the music ventures of Smokey Robinson until his passing. Bobby's cousin, Emerson, would join the band as the lead guitarist, but would leave early in their career. Later on, Bobby's sister Claudette would replace Emerson. And if the name rings a bell, you're actually right. Claudette would go on to become Smokey's wife in 1959. With the new members joining, the band changed their name to The Miracles and would become monumental for Motown Records. But of course, their early years weren't about their breakthrough record. The band started to play venues in Detroit. Believe it or not, but it would be Smokey's musical journal from his high school years that would put them on the map. Here's how. The success of the Miracles and Motown. There's no doubt that the band was desperate to find a record deal. But their efforts proved to be futile. Either there were no opportunities whatsoever, or the Miracles simply failed to impress the big shots at record labels. Most famously, the band had a flop audition for Brunswick Records. And, well, Smokey Robinson was extremely heartbroken. But that wasn't the end for the band. In fact, that disaster of an audition led him to meet Berry Gordy. At that time, Gordy hadn't started Motown, but was working with major labels. During his meeting with Gordy, Smokey took his Big Ten notebook that had hundreds of his songs that he had penned down while he was still in high school. That journal was monumental in impressing Gordy with Smokey's lyrical talent. He knew instantly that his songwriting had always been ambitious and that he could mentor the kid. Plus, Smokey's vocals impressed Gordy too, enough to give him and the Miracles the golden opportunity to record a single with End Records. Gordy helped the Miracles to release their first single, Got a Job, which was written as the response to the popular hit of that time, Get a Job by the Silhouettes. That sort of musical venture wasn't very common during that particular era. So, the Miracles knew they were forging on to start off with something unique. For Smokey, that was a dream come true. That is why he decided to drop out of college where he was studying electrical engineering. Before Gordy even thought of starting Motown or Tamla, he knew that he would be a long-term collaborative partner for Smokey's band. For a soulful singer, he was one of the best songwriters in the music industry. Gordy had written the hit records by J.C. Wilson. Coincidentally, Smokey got to meet his songwriting idol while auditioning in front of Wilson's manager. This is how he knew how to impress Gordy to work with his band. He didn't opt to do the most popular and the it thing to impress him. In fact, he chose to show him his original songwriting. And, well, we can't say that the strategy didn't work like a charm. So the duo had something substantial in common: the love for profound lyrics. This is why Gordy took Smokey under his wing and mentored his songwriting until he got his belt of super mega hits. The relationship between the two transcended record and business deals too. Before Gordy could become the Motown hotshot, he had struck a friendship with Smokey Robinson, and their camaraderie would continue till the years to come. The musical trajectory of the Miracles would change drastically when Berry Gordy would start his own record label, Tamla Records. Very early into its inception, Tamla would become Motown's primary subsidiary to make and release mainstream R&B and soul music. And true to its word, the label would put African-American artists at the forefront of the music industry. The mastermind behind Tamla would sign up Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonders, the Marvelettes, and of course Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. In fact, the latter became the first ever band to sign a record deal with Tamla, and eventually, Motown. Gordy's vision with Motown became a huge driving force behind Smokey's band. Of course, Berry was inspired to give African-American artists an outlet for freedom and creativity. But at the same time, he wanted to establish a record label that, in his words, would make anyone ordinary into a star. And that was the exact push that Smokey Robinson and the Miracles needed to start working on their hit single that would put them on the map forever. In the late 1960s, the band recorded the song Shop Around, which would become the first million-selling hit single for Motown. Smokey never looked back then. In the decade to come, he would become the chief producer, songwriter, and vocalist for the record label while working alongside his band. Since the label was taking in new singers who hadn't had prior experience with original material, Motown was lucky to have Smokey on board. His biggest hits included You've Really Got a Hold on Me, I Second That Emotion, Mickey's Monkey, Baby, Baby Don't Cry, and of course, their #1 hit, The Tears of a Clown. The continuous success of these songs meant that Smokey had earned a reputation for himself. He was not only penning down these hit singles, but he was integral in making sure that the music charts as well. This is why, in 1965, Motown decided to permanently name the Miracles as Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. The change took effect for their album Going to a Go-Go, which was released in the same year. The band's musical success could be attributed to the competitiveness that existed in Motown. It was well known that Gordy worked exclusively with the philosophy of competition breeds success. He was very clear that whoever gets the record deal from Motown can't work passively. For them to drive their sales and critical success, they'd have to compete with each other. Yet, surprisingly, Smokey didn't experience any toxicity during his time at the label. If anything, it was the exact opposite. The reason why Gordy was successful with Motown was because of his collaborative nature. He always knew the right person for the job. This is why Smokey Robinson was writing many hit singles for his direct competitors like Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder. Yet there was a lot of love in Motown too. Talking about this experience, Smokey said, "We were always there for each other. We always helped each other, even though we were competing, because everybody wanted the best for everybody else. So if you could do something that would enhance what this person was doing, you would do it because we were all brothers and sisters. We were a family growing up there at Motown. In all fairness, Smokey had turned Motown into a phenomenon. You see, he was writing his own music at the time, when no one expected musicians to do so. Even the big names like Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye were working alongside lyricists like Smokey to find one hit single or the other. But of course, the Miracles had a different model altogether. One of the members of the band was writing original music for their albums, and that's how things were working out for them. Times have changed drastically now. Nowadays, musicians are expected to write their own music or work alongside lyricists. If one foot is in the studio, the other is in the writing room. Motown didn't have that model. So there was a lot of competition among the songwriters too. This is precisely why Smokey's career would take a hit. He had been the golden boy for Motown and Berry Gordy until the label hired songwriters and producers that had a fresher take on contemporary music. That's the time when artists were emerging to write their own music for the sake of authenticity and finding a connection with their audience. While these steps were important for the music industry, Smokey Robinson started to lose his importance for the label exponentially. The reason why he looks at his late years in Motown, very sadly, is because of the abrupt end of his songwriter career. Eventually, he would leave the band and start his non-so-successful solo career. So, what went down? But before we move forward, it's time for today's subscribers pick. Smokey Robinson is now 80, and how he lives today is sad. One of our subscribers has shared this picture of the singer that has left us distraught. The musician who once ruled the world looks feeble due to his old age. While his famous green eyes are glistening still, we can't help but notice the sadness behind them. Many speculate that the turbulent end of Smokey's band and solo career has left him with several regrets. We'll talk about this later in the video, but his difficult married life with his first wife Claudette didn't settle well for his children either. We don't know if Smokey's children visit him or not, but by the looks of it, he's wary of old age. And maybe the lonely life at a winery with his second life isn't working out too well for him. What do you think? Let us know what you think. Now let's talk about why Smokey would leave the band at the apex of his career. The end of the Miracles. Towards the 70s, Motown was going through major structural changes. Foremost, the label had decided to hire two class acts that would change the creative direction of Motown. The trio act of Holland Dozier Holland consisted of Lamont Dozier and brothers Eddie and Brian Holland. While the group had significant internal disputes and conflicts, their working style would define the Motown sound in the 60s. Dozier and Holland brothers knew what they were doing, and their collaborative effort paid off. Other than them, Motown also hired the team of Norman Whitfield and Barrett Song, which also proved to be another successful decision for Berry Gordy. The arrival of these musical icons meant that Smokey's exclusivity as a successful songwriter and top producer for the label would change. And, well, it didn't take much for Smokey to get eclipsed at the record label that he had curated by penning down some of the most successful hits of his time. During the same period, Smokey's most successful collaborators had decided to write their own music as well. Motown singers like Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, and others had decided to take the Smokey approach with their music. And that meant that if Smokey wasn't writing songs for his own band, his services weren't required at all. He would continue to write songs for acts like the Contours, but he knew that it wasn't the same. Motown had officially moved on from the creative genius of Smokey Robinson. That issue struck a major dent in the soulful singer's confidence. That's when he decided to take retirement from the musical venture of Motown. But also, his obligations with the label had become a huge hindrance to his family's well-being. This is when Smokey knew that he had to retire from touring. He also decided to step down as the vice president of Motown, a job he had only taken to fill the shoes of Esther Gordy Edwards, sister of Berry Gordy. But then, something magical happened. In the blink of an eye, the group's Tears of a Clown had become a smashing hit. This ultimate success gave Smokey some incentive to stay with Motown and continue with his musical efforts. But alas, all good things must come to an end. In the year 1972, Robinson decided to leave the band to focus on his family. He performed for the last time in Washington, D.C. In the same year, the Miracles found another lead singer, William L. Griffin. While the split seemed amicable, there was a dark side to Smokey's decision too. The sadness of a difficult marital life left Smokey extremely sad and distressed. A part of that sadness still lives with the legendary musician. So, what went down? Smokey Robinson's sad family life. In a famous interview with Vulture, the interviewer asked Smokey an important question. He asked, "You retired for a year starting in 1972, and that's a stretch where Stevie Wonder put out Talking Book, Al Green put out I'm Still in Love with You, and Aretha Franklin put out Young, Gifted, and Black. How badly did you miss making music that year?" Now, that was an important observation to make. After Smokey took a year of retirement, he wasn't able to keep up with his former collaborators. All of the Motown singers had surpassed Smokey in several ways. In fact, Smokey's solo career couldn't yield the measures of success that individuals like Stevie Wonder, Franklin, Marvin Gaye, and Eddie Kendricks had produced. Yet to everyone's surprise, Smokey didn't mind losing to his competitors at all. To the question posed earlier, he replied that he didn't regret taking a break at all. No one knew how hard his marriage had gotten towards the end of his time with the Miracles. The soulful singer's wife, Claudette, was part of the band too. The couple had gotten married in 1959, and they would go on to have 2 children, a son named Barry and a daughter named Tamla. At the forefront, the couple seemed like a match made in heaven. Both he and Claudette were extremely committed to the cause of Motown and their band, The Miracles. Their children's names also indicate their passion for the record label that had transformed their musical career. But the reality couldn't have been far from different. The facade of a happy marriage diminished quickly when Smokey made his musical career the apex of his life. While Claudette was constantly traveling for the band as well, her husband had additional duties with Motown. That caused a significant strain on their marriage. But then things started to go downhill when Smokey cheated on Claudette several times throughout their marriage. Any news outlet didn't have to write an exposé on Smokey Robinson's infidelity at all. The singer had decided to come clean himself. His most infamous affair was with Diana Ross. The relationship had gone on for a year until Ross felt guilty about having an extramarital affair with her friend's husband. Robinson self-admittedly was also still in love with Claudette. The duo decided to end their relationship, but of course Robinson's marriage with Claudette wasn't the same. But that's not the only reason why Smokey's marriage was in shambles. During their time together, Claudette had suffered 7 miscarriages as a result of touring constantly with the band. She had decided to retire from music, but it was too late. The couple had their first son, Barry, through a surrogate mother, and while Claudette gave birth to their daughter, the pregnancy left her extremely sick. She was always in bed, and her musical career deteriorated. Not to mention, Robinson wasn't always the most present dad. While talking to Vulture, he revealed that he feared that he'd lose any and all connection with his children. He said, "My kids were here, and they were precious, and they were just little kids at that time. I didn't want to have to be absent from their lives all the time, and when I come home, they don't know whether to say, 'Can I have your autograph?' or 'Hi, Daddy.'" That's when he knew that he had to take a break from music to focus on his family and a marriage that was failing. Robinson would start making music again a year later. Around 1974, Smokey was back in the music scene, but his marriage was almost over as he admitted to cheating on Claudette again. The Robinsons had separated but hadn't filed for divorce legally, so they decided to give their marriage another shot. However, a decade later, Smokey had cheated on his wife again. And this time, he had fathered a son named Trey with another woman. In 1984, he filed for legal separation from his first wife. Robinson then married Frances Gladney in May 2002. The couple resides in Pittsburgh. The turbulent end to his marriage with Claudette had caused significant harm to Robinson's reputation. The sadness of making all of the wrong decisions about the woman he once loved is a painful reminder for now an 83-year-old Smokey Robinson. But that's not all. After embarking on a solo career, Smokey had hoped that his talent would outshine the soul and R&B acts of his time. But he couldn't have been more wrong. His first solo album, Smokey, didn't exactly top the charts, but included a tribute song to the Miracles and the hit Baby Come Close. His next album, Pure Smokey, was a major flop. Only his third album, A Quiet Storm, would see success. And with that, his career went downhill. His disconnect with Motown meant that his albums weren't well promoted, and the reviews turned out to be extremely bad. For the next couple of albums, Smokey even had to hire writers to help him out. This was a huge setback for him because his career had started him off as a quintessential writer of soulful music. But today, when it comes to discussing the legacies of the Motown singers, Smokey's career gets easily overshadowed by the artists he was mentoring. No wonder, at the reflective age of 80, he's sad and alone. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.